So today in this video I'm going to talk about probes and how probes could be used in Kubernetes to make sure our application is always running, and in case our application is not responding, either Kubernetes could cut down the incoming traffic or Kubernetes could try to restart our application so that our application is always up and running and healthy all the time. So let's look at the various types of probes that Kubernetes provides for monitoring our application. So there are three types of probes that Kubernetes has. Number one is liveness probes. These types of probes are used to make sure the application is always running. So there could be scenarios like due to deadlocks or some memory constraints and all, the application is not responding. So in those types of scenarios, the best plan of action would be to restart the application container so that like the application starts from fresh and the problem is resolved. So liveness probes are used for this, and if the application is not responding successfully to liveness probes, Kubernetes would restart the container in these scenarios. The next type of probes is readiness probes, which are different from liveness probes. So there could be scenarios in which our application is dependent upon something else. So for example, our application depends upon database, and for whatever reason, like there is some instance of time for which the connections to database are not working. So in this scenario, restarting of the application's container would not add any value because the application is running fine. It's just that the database connection is not working. So for these types of scenarios, the best plan of action would be to stop the incoming traffic until the connection to a database is established and just wait. So readiness probes are used for this, so which cuts down the incoming traffic to that pod so that the traffic could go to the other pods which are healthy and active, right? And the traffic to this pod would be cut down. So the third type of probes are startup probes. So suppose our application, like if you think about legacy applications, they would sometimes take like a couple of minutes to start, and liveness probes, it tries to just kick in immediately, or you could have a startup time configured for it. But when liveness probe sees that application is not responding, it would just restart the container, right? So if your application takes a few minutes, this could create a problem because it would, like, your restart would happen in a loop, right? Because liveness probe would see that the application is not responding, so it would try to restart, but the application has actually not started, right? Because the startup time is a couple of minutes. So these types of scenarios, the startup probe is very useful because you could configure it, and after the startup probe is successful, only then the readiness and the liveness probes would trigger in, right? So those are the two types of probes. Like liveness probe, which restarts the application container, would not trigger in until the startup probe is successful. So let's look at an application and try to see in detail these probes and how they could be used. By the way, if you're liking the video so far, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button because it motivates me a lot. So this is our pod definition file where we define a container and we say that it refers to some image. So I already have a pre-built image and all, which I'll walk through what it does. So the interesting thing to look at is that it has three probes: liveness, startup, and readiness probe. So if you look at the startup probe, so it has we use a startup probe, and Kubernetes come with HTTP GET probes. They provide some other things, like we could use some commands, or we could also use some TCP methods and all, but I'm just using HTTP GET. So you could also run a curl command and all to achieve the same thing. So it would make a HTTP request at port 3000 and the path would be startup. And the initial delay is 5 seconds and the failure threshold is 10. So it will try for 10 times, and the period is it will try for like for after every 5 seconds. So if we look at the server that we have, like I'm just using a node server. So the code mainly starts from here, which is server. I'm creating a server here. So I read a counter from a file. The reason I'm reading it from a file, which is a read counter, basically I read a file. The reason I'm reading it from the file is so that even if the container restarts, my counter is maintained. So after I read the counter, I write it, like I increment it by 1. This is just to see that how many number of requests are coming in, and this is like if the request comes to a startup. So for the first 5 requests, right, if only like, so it will go to this condition, the else one. I say that the server is not ready. Only after the 5th I would just say that it is ready, and it responds back. So when I go to respond back, it would give return a status 200, and it returns this message which has like a date and all, and the message which corresponds to the probe name and all, right, and then the counter, and the same thing is logged, so we could see that what type of probes are being called and all. So that was startup probe. Similarly, like only after the startup probe succeeds, our other 2 probes would be called, which is readiness and liveness. Similarly, I have other conditions for liveness and readiness, but we'll look into those conditions after we just look at like how the server responds and all. So let's start a server and see how things work. So I will say kubectl. So that's the pod definition file, and it says the node app is created. So I will just try to tail the logs. So it says startup. The first, like the startup is called, and it says the counter is 1. It's called the next time, and only after the 5th time it would say that it's ready, and then we'll see that the liveness and readiness probes would also get started. So this is because of this condition that we have the startup, like the counter only after 5 it says it is ready. So now you say the startup was not ready, but then it says startup call, so it returns a 200, and after that we see both the readiness and the liveness probe, they both kick in and they see whether the application is running or not. So in this case we see that liveness, it says it's not ready. So if I try to hit the server, we get we would not get a response in this scenario, right? So let me try to show you the browser and see that the server does not respond. This is my application. So still my application is like, it says liveness is not ready, but like readiness is not ready, but the liveness is fine now, because readiness I add more delay, and that's why it is not like, for readiness I have the counter is 30 seconds. So now it says readiness is fine, and now if I try to reload the application from the browser, it says that it is ready, and then it responds with the counter, right? So if you look at the logs from starting now, so we have like the counter started at 0. So initially we say that the startup was only the startup probe was getting called, right? We don't see any like requests for readiness or liveness. Only like for the first 5 requests the startup probe was called. After the 6th the startup was successful, right? After it was successful, only after that we got requests for the readiness and liveness probes. So they start both. So they both are independent. Liveness probe is to tell whether the application is running or not. Readiness probe tells whether the application is ready to accept requests or not. So liveness probes, if you see, it said like at counter number 20, the liveness probe should say that it is fine. So here it was saying liveness probe not ready, and after that it says liveness call. So liveness is ready now, but the readiness was not ready at that time. Means that even if the application is fine, the application is not ready to receive any traffic. That's why we saw even at this time the application was not responding when we were hitting from the browser. Only after the counter went to 30, after the 30 condition, which is here, the counter after it was greater than 30, we said the readiness is also fine, and then we saw the application responded fine in the URL, right? So this is where we respond back, and all we are doing is we were just returning the connection, like we were just saying like some date and the counter number, right? So if we look back to the browser, it is too small. We just increase the size. right? So you see, like, the moment I hit, it went to 34, but only at this time it said it is fine. Below 30, it never said, like, the no request was sent to the app, even if the app was fine at counter number 20. By the way, if you're liking the video so far, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button because it motivates me a lot. Let's try to look at some use cases to understand that when do we need to use what type of probes. So use case 1 is we want to make sure that there is no deadlocks in the application and it's always running. So in these cases we would use Liveness probe, right? Because the readiness probe, all it would do is just make sure that the traffic is not coming, like the traffic does not come in, right? But the container that is serving would not be restarted in that case. So liveness probe needs to be used in these cases. Next is the application is temporarily down, right? And you don't want to serve the traffic. So example, the connectivity issues with the database. So in this case, like, the application is fine, but it is just the connections are not working fine. So add a readiness probe and restarting the application container will be of no use. Use case 3 is when the startup time is slow, right? It takes a lot of time to start up. So in those scenarios, add a startup probe also, so that the readiness probe and the liveness probes could trigger in only after the startup probe succeeds. So there are additional configurations that you provide to the probes. First is initial delay, that after how many seconds the probe should start. Next is period seconds, that is the interval after how much times should it try again. And the next is timeout, that for how many seconds it should wait for the response to get back. And then is the success threshold, that after how many successes should it consider the application is up. Then is the failure threshold, that after how many number of failures should it try to restart the container. So if you like the full video, please subscribe to my channel and hit the like button because it motivates me a lot to make more such videos.